All right, welcome everybody to this month's CV and Caffeine. So, what are we doing here? We're here with three fantastic career visioning instructors to talk all about the KPA graph today and the details of that. Yes, just one tiny little page of that 70-page packet that you get when you take the KPA. So, grab your favorite caffeinated beverage, and in my case, that is a sparkling ice with my favorite koozie on it. Peter, you look at me like I'm insane. I don't drink coffee,
I
guys.
don't, yeah, but that was still cool looking. I like it.
Yeah, there you go. So we're going to talk all about this KPA graph today. So you're going to learn some of the ins and outs, the behind the scenes things, those little details and nuances that you get from the experts that you might not get your first few times reading a KPA, your first few times even going through career visioning. So in our pre-conversation, before we got started here, Linda brought up a really awesome point that I want to go dive right into to start our conversation. And that is the extremes, right? So when you look at your KPA graph, like I'm literally talking about just the graph, none of the other stuff, just the graph. You'll notice that you've got your little black dots on it. That symbolizes where your or somebody else's, if it's their KPA, behavioral traits lie, right? Their behaviorals, their thinking traits, etc. And you'll notice there's two extremes, all the way to 0, all the way to 10. Not good or bad, just is. And she was referencing how she looks for those extremes in people. So, Linda, tell us a little bit about that, because personally, my entire graph is extremes, right? I literally have nothing in the middle. I am polarized. So, tell us what you mean about the extremes and why you look for that, why it's important to you.
Yeah. Well, the extremes are where people are most fixed. They're most committed to those behaviors. And we are trying to do a job match, right? So the closer we can get to a role that actually needs those extremes, the better they're going to succeed, the happier we're going to be, everything works. And so I've just learned that those are the ones that they're most committed to. The ones that are in the middle are flexible. So you really have to do a little bit of digging and see sometimes wisdom and experiences have caused people to understand, if I'm extreme on intensity, I need to be able to know when to be intense and when not to be intense. And I learned this from Mark Willis years ago, even when we used the ABA and all many other assessments that we've had, that people are most committed to those extremes. So I want to look at those extremes first, and then think about that in relation to the role that they're going to be in. And how committed they'll be to those extreme behavior, and how are those behaviors needed in the role that I actually want to put them in.
It's interesting when you look at how we can be rigid on those, right? Like these are the extremes. Like I'm very well suited for the role I actually have behaviorally. However, there was a very brief stint many years ago where I helped in my office as the interim TL while we were sourcing a new team leader. I am, yeah, Peter, that's how it went. I see your face. I am not very well suited for that. My sociability is a 0.5. And one of the things that a team leader has to be really great at is that people and the energy in bringing the office together. And I'm great, like you're saying, Linda, I can do it for a little bit amount of time, but at month 2,
yeah, you're tired.
I was tired at day 2, but I could hold on to it, right? Because I knew I needed to for the role successfully for like a month, 2 months. Yeah. But after that, it was just the well had been tapped dry. There was nothing left. And because I knew it was important for the role mentally, right? The leader in me went, I know I need to do this. Great. I can behave that way. But it's acting out of authenticity. And when you act out of authenticity, it becomes stressful, and it's a burden on.
However, Liz, in a different situation where you're only the launching team leader, you probably could have killed it and loved every second of it, because you're about meeting with somebody, get them to come on board. It's when you have to start using that sociability on a daily basis that it's like an energy battery. It's going to keep getting depleted and depleted and depleted and depleted. And the only time it's going to get filled up is when you go home and shut the door and get in a bubble bath by yourself, because you don't want to be around people.
Headphones on, lights down.
Yeah. But launching team leader, I've seen that same low sociability kill it as somebody who just helps you get one launched.
That's interesting. I can completely see how that would be a good thing to have for that. Crush the consult, crush the close, move on to the next.
Yeah.
And I'm more mid-level in sociability. I've been a TL for most of the 15 years. And what it means for me is if I've got an ALC meeting and a big like sales meeting, all partner meeting in a day, I know I'm not doing recruiting appointments at the end of that day. Like that's now get into the office, close the door. I'll do anything but people because I gotta balance it a little bit. Right? If I'm putting it big over here, then I gotta hit the little refresh button on it. So yeah.
That's a
Well,
great
and that's a
point.
flex trait for you, right, Brad? So that's
Right. It's
you're,
more
you're
in the middle.
there.
So that's where the flexibility comes in.
Brad, you said before we got on this that when you see a big discrepancy in extreme behavior that's sort of antithetical to what you're looking for, that is the stress zone, I believe is what you were saying.
Yeah. It's especially if you've got the printout of the graph, right? And you've got those little black boxes, and that's where the person is, that's where the candidate is. And then you've got those gray bars, which is the range, the desired range for that role. The further the gap is, the bigger the word stress is, we tend to find. And those are also areas that you want to just dive super deep and look at, where have they been able to successfully, kind of counter that professionally? Because much to Linda's point, like with certain level of intelligence, maturity, and experience, people find ways to work around, some of those gaps. But sometimes you find, oh yeah, no, they have not figured out how to do that, and they're not going to do it. So don't set them up for failure by getting into a business with them in that kind of role. So yeah.
The other thing I'll probe for there is how self-aware are they of when they need to recharge, and do they know how to do that efficiently, right? So
that's great.
If they're able to flex, a lot of people that are older, a little bit wiser, understand when they need to flex on something that isn't their strength zone. They also aren't aware of when they need to dial back and go do something else to recharge. That's when you hit burnout, and that's when it can quickly become the wrong hire. So it doesn't immediately disqualify if there's a pretty significant gap between where you want the trait to be in an extreme behavioral style. But to your point, they've got to be aware of it, and they've got to know how and when they need to recharge.
Yeah, big time.
Yep. I'm very big on my recharge time.
Yeah, me too.
Very important to me, especially like at family reunion, etc.
Oh, 100%.
As soon as we shut down the last day, nobody hears from me for like 36, 72 hours, depending on how rough of a week it was. Like it's at least 36 hours starting period, could go all the way to 72 if necessary. Just quiet, dark couch and Netflix makes me happy. That's what I need after all that interaction. It's not that I don't love it. It's just that I'm exhausted at the end of it. It's physically draining. Now, let's kind of talk about one of the most hated parts of the KPA, of the graph section. And Brad, you brought this up in the beginning phase. So I'm going to hand it to you. Brad, what is the most hated thing on that single page of the KPA graph?
And again, putting that through the filter of, I love it and it's an incredible tool. I think we tend to get too persuaded by the little graph at the top that says low, medium, or high, right?
Yep.
When we see one of those green diamonds under the word high, especially if we aren't that experienced with this, if this is newer for us, a lot of times I see people go, green light,
so
I get to skip the rest of the process because I found a winner. And we just have to keep in mind that first off, when you receive it, you haven't validated it yet. So it might not even be accurate, right? When you do enough of these, you do realize there is a percentage that it's just going to be off. Maybe it was the environment they were taking in or whatever. So it might be off showing you that they're the right person. And then the other piece is you're going to get to know them way better by taking this piece and having the thought process interview, right? Because that's where we really start unlocking how they think, and you start to see some of these traits come to life. So for me, I wish we could just cover that top bar until we've done those first couple of conversations, then peel it back and go, okay, where are some of our issues? Where are some of our concerns? So that's a little peeve one for me.
Well, and it's interesting you say that, because just as many people would want to hire that person right off the get-go with the green diamond, just as many people won't proceed forward to the next conversation if it's in the red.
Yep. Yep. The first time I took the KPA, I was a medium match for the TL. And, but that was an unvalidated version of it. And I'd already been in the TL role for, I think, 8 years. So it's like I don't think that's right, and I've got mine pulled up right now, and it's like, no, it is a high match. There was, you know, I needed to retake it. I needed to, you know, so there was some correction that had to happen with it. Yeah.
Peter, from a tactical standpoint,
Yep.
how are you utilizing this graph? What does it mean to you? Is there any key things that you're like, this is important to me? I understand it's not part of the process, but I look for this. Is there anything like that for you?
I love that question. 100%. Yes, absolutely. And I think, you know, when you've done this enough, one of the things before I kind of give blanket advice, some tactical advice on how I use this to hire salespeople, we have to recognize that different sales organizations have different cultures and different lead generation processes and sources, and different lead gen sources require different behavioral strengths, right? So we're a little bit more of a transactional real estate sales team. And so I'm more interested in like core drive, core urgency, lower adaptability versus a relational one. You want a little bit more sociability, maybe a little bit of less intensity, a little bit more adaptability. Personally, one of the things that I always feel like is a red flag, to your point, Brad, doesn't mean I'm out. It's going to mean I'm going to explore this a little bit deeper. I'm always wary of high sociability, high adaptability. And I think if I had a bone to pick on the graph, Brad, you said it's that top chart. For me, it is the word adaptability.
Yep.
Because though those of us don't pay attention during CV, we think adaptability means like, oh, they can quickly adapt to whatever I put at them.
Yeah, they're nimble, they're agile. This is going to be
accommodate others.
great.
What's that?
Yeah, it's like they're nimble, they're agile, they can move with the punches.
No, that's not what it means.
Right.
It means that they have a high desire to accommodate other people. If you have high sociability, you don't like to hear no. If you have high adaptability, your desire is to accommodate others. Those are all great traits, but they don't make for great salespeople naturally, because you're always going to be afraid to ask for the business. One, because you're rejected, or two, because you don't think it's like the right time to ask for something for the other person. So I'm always really wary of high sociability, high adaptability. The other one that I'm a little wary of is low intensity. There are great roles where a lower intensity is really valuable. In the world of 100% commission sales, especially if you have a little bit more of a transactional real estate team, you want some intensity. Intensity is like the fuel on the fire, right? I've seen people with like high assertion, high sociability and all this stuff, but their intensity is super low. And like, you think you've got a champion behaviorally, but that fuel is like, there's no kindling in that fire. And so it just doesn't go anywhere. And so, I think the adapter traits are really interesting and underappreciated and underinvestigated when we're looking at the whole person, the whole chart. There's a lot to be told in those. Gosh, what's the trait? I can't remember what those three traits are called.
Modifiers.
Modifiers. Thank you. In the modifier traits, pay attention to those. They tell you volumes.
It's so interesting that you say that on those. Like I always talk about, right? So when we look at the KPA graph, every role has its 3 different high impact, medium impact, and low impact, which is why you can't just take them and lay them on top of each other, because the roles have different priority ranked traits. Knowing me, I'm a 9.5 responsiveness, 9 assertiveness, 9.5 intensity. I know me.
My people.
Yeah, that's why we get along, guys. And therefore, I know what I need in somebody if they're going to be a direct report for me. I need those people who are going to be above a 6.5 or a 7 on the responsiveness and the intensity. I know that means that they could likely be volatilely a hothead like me sometimes, right? Like there's some issues that come with this for sure. And there's a lot of passion behind it, right? Like that generally to me resonates as a passionate person. Now they might be passionate about the wrong things. That's a whole different ballgame in development and maturity and intelligence and all those things. But it's a person that's gonna have some fire in them for something. And I can work with fire. I can't work with lack of engagement and passion. That's me. But as you're saying, there's certain roles in certain teams, the way they're structured, where it's like, they need that in something. And so while it matters what the KPA actually ranks as high and medium and low for that, once you begin to really understand it in depth of who you are and what your team needs, just to Peter, to your point of these are 2 different types of lead gen, they need 2 different types of people. Like that's important.
100%.
And that's a whole nother part of the thing too, is, you know, I think one of the most important parts of this graph when you're hiring somebody that you're going to work with is your graph.
Yeah, that's
right.
right.
You've got to know you, right? So if you're not even ready to hire people yet, you're really at the beginning of this journey, you need to take the KPA. You need to have somebody validate it. You really need to get to better understand yourself. I'm similar, Liz, in the responsiveness. I'm very high responsiveness. And there's kind of a limit to how low someone's responsiveness can be and still have a good functioning relationship. Like, they can be way different than me, and most are when they come to their aspects of their roles. But that responsiveness piece, yeah, that's where my that's where my DNA starts to influence the hiring process.
Well, and they may not win with you if they're not high responsive, right?
Right.
It's just not going to be a good partnership for you.
Right. Yep.
Well, and I think when you look at this, the hardest part is learning to be the observer, because it's so easy to immediately decide based on either past experiences with people or whatever. But the more, and this is so hard probably for all of us, the more I can learn to be at 30,000 feet just observing and really not being attached to anything, but really observing and seeing how all their behavior plays out. You know, like one of the things that, because I'm always looking for a leadership role or a territory taker or empire builder, if it's low assertive, low intensity and low responsive, it's a no, right? Because I know they're not going to be able to do the role that I need them in. But I also have learned to think, you know, with certain behaviors, that's more of a second in command person. They may not be the leader, but they may be the person that is a great second person with the leader, right? Balance them out a little bit. And then the other thing is I look for, like, if they're high sociability, I go look at their optimism, because I've learned about optimism is if they have super high optimism, they're going to think everything's going to work out. They're not going to look for backup plans. They're not going to
be great.
It's all, everybody loves me and it's going to be great. Right. So I think just the more you can do these, the more you can just practice being an observer of just, I mean, meditation is hard for me, but I kind of relate it to meditating, where you're just in the moment and you try to cut out everything else and you try to just think, okay, let me observe them and how this behavior is going to play out. But I think Brad's right, which I'd never really thought about it. It's hard to do that when you have shadows and graphs and things that show you where they're supposed to be. I think that makes it a little more difficult.
Yeah, it puts in a natural bias.
Yeah.
Right.
Natural bias.
Right. Well, that's okay. Can I go down a little rabbit hole here?
Charge. Go.
Yeah, here we go. I'm going anyway, right? I think we as the hirers in these situations also have to be careful to almost kind of hedge when we hire people. I see this a lot. You know, I'm hiring this candidate and, you know, and they're kind of in this, like, they're good match, not great. And I can see in how they're acting that they're not fully committed. So that this graph has influenced them as a, well, we'll see if it works out. It's like, no. Like, if you get somebody to the finish line and you decide to hire them, you have to be all in. You have to be 100% committed to their success. They're making changes in their life, their family. They might be moving, like all of that stuff. Now, that doesn't negate the fact that we're still going to put them through a 30, 60, 90. But that 30, 60, 90 is setting them up to win, right? So sometimes I've seen people where, let's say they've got a yellow medium and they're hiring them. You can hear in their language as the person hiring that they're hedging. It's like, well, we'll see. We'll see. It's like, no. If you're at we'll see, you don't hire. You got to go find more candidates, right? You got to be 100% committed. So that's the other thing that I think to watch on this. Don't let it influence you in kind of not being fully committed to that person when you go to hire them, right?
So let's look at now the after you hire them, right? And we kind of mentioned this in our pre-talk right before we went live for this is, you know, the KPA tool is not just a hiring tool, it's a people tool, right? And, you know, plot twist, once we hire somebody, we actually have to lead them and develop them and cultivate them and hold them accountable, solve problems with them, and all of these magical things that come along with being in the people business, right? How do we lead with the KPA? Do you guys lead with it? Do you use that graph in any unique ways once you've got somebody on board, you've hired them?
Well, I think,
What are they unique? Any best
like I said
practice?
before, I like to go back and look at it. If I feel like they're handling something maybe a different way than I think it should be handled, if I can go back and look at that KPA, I can kind of observe, oh, they need a little more information, because you can always see that look in somebody's eye when we're talking about the game plan, but they're not 100% committed to the game plan. And so instead of continually be frustrated, go back and see if you can understand, maybe there's a little more, maybe they need a little more information than you need, because they have to be committed to the action before they take it. Whereas someone like us may just take the action and then figure out what happens afterwards, right? So I think using it to go back and, because I was looking at somebody's earlier to try to figure out, okay, it doesn't seem to be working the style I'm doing it. So how could I get them to self-discover, or what's keeping them from taking action the way I think they should? Is it lower on, are they lower on responsive? No, not really, but maybe they need a little more information than I do. I don't know. So I like going back and looking at it after you hire them, when you feel like you've got a little bit of a rub on a situation. Because honestly, we have to look at ourselves. We're committed to our behavior too. And it's not always the perfect behavior to lead. So I got to look at mine and say, is this unrealistic expectations I have because I am such a quick start that nobody's ever fast enough? But is that realistic for what they're actually doing? So it really makes me look at myself a little bit too, because just because I'm that way doesn't mean that's the perfect response they should have or way they should handle it. So just trying to coordinate after you hire them, I think it's as effective as hiring tool. Honestly.
Let me take that one. Oh, sorry, Brad, you
Yeah.
say something.
No, go ahead.
Let me take that one step further. Linda, we have to remember also that people solve problems in different ways. And you and I are going to run straight up the center and smash something until it breaks and we go through it. But that isn't the only way to solve for a problem. And I've hired people that are very talented who I almost immediately went to, they're not doing this right. I got to like fix this before they go too far down the path. And luckily I've lost enough hair as in my aging to realize, like, okay, give them space to be successful the way they need to do it. And by checking their KPA and remembering that mine is so committed to this one way of doing things, you can remove your own personal bias from the observation of how they're going about solving a problem or taking action. And if you're willing to give them that space and recognize there's more than one way to solve a problem, you can empower somebody to win the way they win and not have to have them constantly be in a place of stress trying to win the way that you might win.
One of the things too, I think with this, as a leader, I think it is our responsibility to ensure that communication happened, right? Mm-hmm. Not that we're just, bleh, now it's your freaking problem. It's like, no. Like, we got to make sure that the communication is actually happening, that the understanding is happening, the conveyance is happening. There's somebody I've worked with now for almost 10 years, and he's highly sociable. I know when we sit down to have a meeting, I got to carve out 5 to 10 minutes just for nothing.
Yeah.
How are you? What's going on? Tell me about the weekend. Like, I don't need that conversation, right? I enjoy it. It's not like I hate it or anything like that, but I am totally fine going right to where are we at, what's the schedule, what do we got to do, but he is definitely going to benefit from that. We're going to get more out of our 30 minutes if we spend our 5 minutes that way, right? So it's been slow learned for me, but gradually just becoming more and more intentional of, how do I need to show up for this person? Is this a bullet point conversation for them? Is this a detail conversation like Linda was kind of talking about? Like, I gotta give this person more details so they can get, a better decision made? Or do they just need to feel safe before we start diving into accountability? Right? And so I think this graph can be a simple sketch of what is the personality that I really need to be communicating with?
Yeah.
Right. And that becomes the counterpoint to, okay, where are my challenges with it? My challenge is going to be, be the bull in a china shop. So how do I put a leash on that bull for the first 5 minutes?
Can I add something to that, Brad?
Yeah.
A lot of assertive behavior is kind of lionized in this company or in sales industries in general. And I think that because it's lionized, there's this sort of like, well, I'm the driver, you do the things the way I want it done, and you have to show up because I'm the D, you accommodate my high D behavioral style.
Right.
And that's patently stupid.
Yeah.
If you're the leader, your job is to accommodate and communicate in a way that the person that you're leading can understand and process, internalize, and act on. And I see this all the time with mega agents that I coach or that I'm just colleagues with. They seem to think that everybody has to sort of conjure up this inner D to meet the D where they are, and that's dumb. That's not leadership. That's just basically like an ego with some minions surrounding you, and that's just one person with just an ego with like little satellite people surrounding this big ego. That's dumb. That's not a team, and that's not leadership.
And if you
And there's a lot of
you
that.
don't,
There's a
you don't,
lot
There's a ton of that, Liz. 100%. There's a ton of it.
yeah.
And by the way, the company will never grow beyond that leader if that leader can't figure out how to communicate and lead people that aren't exactly like them behaviorally.
Yeah, I find that there are often people who go from solopreneurs
Yes.
to pretty big, messy teams that can be very highly successful and ultimately back to solo.
Yeah.
Because they are not willing to do the work that it's going to take to really succeed through other people. And it's
That's
like,
right.
you can still make a great living, but you're going to be doing it by yourself.
That mess is sustained because that leader stays at the center of all of the order.
ecosystem.
But if that person checks out in any way, it's all going to spin apart because they've never figured out how to cultivate, how to communicate with and lead their leaders correctly.
Well, and that's such an interesting point, Peter. And that's the difference of what I call a difference in a professional practitioner and a business owner. There's a lot of people that are professional practitioners of real estate who have support around them, but that's where they live.
That's right.
It's not a business until it's no longer about that person being in the middle of it, right? And where that person can lead through others, as you're talking about. But if it relies on this centerpiece, this pinnacle linchpin person to have that ecosystem around them, right? That's just a professional real estate practitioner with support.
Yeah.
Like, that's not a business.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yep.
All right. Well, we are in our final minutes. So here's what I will ask of all of you. And Brad, we're going to start with you because you're in the bottom right-hand corner of my screen.
Sounds good.
What's your last words of wisdom or your mic drop moment you would give to anybody watching this today regarding the KPA graph, hiring, any words of wisdom you would like to bestow upon them?
I'll go back to kind of where Linda was talking, but through the filter of ourselves. I've got my KPA up as we're having this conversation. That's why I keep looking over. And my extremes, not only do they show up all the time, the more stressed I am, the more committed I am to them, right? It's so I'm super low on adaptability. It's on another piece of paper that's taped to it. Like we can do it any way we want as long as it's my way, and we'll have a lot of fun doing it. We're going to laugh about it, but it's going to go ahead and be my way. And the more stressed I am, the more things get to be a rub. I double down on that. I quadruple down on that. And having the knowledge of that, it forces me to, especially in stressful times, go, we got to pause this. We got to let some pressure out of this balloon and then revisit this conversation, because I know my tendencies are going to go way too far in the wrong direction, and it's not going to be as collaborative as I normally am. So learning those about yourself, I think, is one of the best things we can do as a leader.
Yep.
I love it. Peter.
Oh, come on. How do I follow up after that?
Sock puppets.
I guess if I had to say a piece of advice, not a piece of advice, a lesson that I've learned is that none of those individual traits exist autonomously or mutually exclusive from the other ones. They all contribute to each other, and the way to understand how they influence each other and how they show up is when you make the wrong hire, which we all inadvertently do a lot when we first get started doing this, is to go back to that KPA, look at the graph, understand why you hired them behaviorally and how they showed up behaviorally, and try and figure out what was the link between those different graphs that they showed up the way they did, then ultimately made it not the right fit for the role.
Yeah.
Love it. Linda, last but not least.
I would say let silence do the heavy lifting. There is so much to learn. The more, and this is a hard thing for all of us because we were salespeople. We thought we got paid for what we knew, but really, and silence and questions. The deeper you can get more specific and get them to specify specifics around a behavior, the more you're going to get committed to hiring them or committed to not putting them in that role. And so I love what Brad said, you know, if it's not an absolute yes, it's a no. If you can get uncomfortable and be okay with uncomfortable for silence, it will give you so much more information than if you are uncomfortable and you move too fast. Just let silence do the heavy lifting. You'll learn so much more. They'll keep talking because they don't like the silence either.
I love it. Well, here's mine for everybody. The KPA is not just a hiring tool. It is a leading tool. And playing on my conversation that I had with Jordan Freed yesterday about leadership, it starts with self, right? Self-leadership is the most underrated thing when it comes to attracting and retaining talent. And so when we understand ourselves and then we use the KPAs of those that we lead to help guide us in those conversations, the mishaps, the pitfalls, the problems, the mixed communications that come up, it's a leadership tool as well for ourselves and for others. So I want to thank the three of you for being here today. Thank you so much. We are on next month, not the three of us, we got a different group, but we are on again next month for our monthly CV and Caffeine. So we will see you all there. Have a great day.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks,
Bye, guys. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.